Hey everybody, welcome to a very special edition of A View from Earth. We're calling this our holiday special, even though it doesn't really have anything to do with the holidays, and it just happens to be released around this time because we thought that there was way too big of a gap between season 2 and our upcoming season 3, which will be out in the spring. And we didn't want to leave you guys hanging for quite that long. So we thought we would do a little something different this time, and we're basically not interviewing any guests. We're kind of interviewing each other. We're going to talk a little bit about how the podcast came to be and kind of who we are and what we do, a little more than just our basic intros that we normally give, and give you guys kind of an insight into A View from Earth and Fiske and all of the cool things that we do. So as always, I am Tara. I'm a planetary scientist and a CU alum. I'm a presenter at Fiske and of course co-hosting the podcast. And as always, Colin and John are here with me.
Hi, Tara. It's me, Colin, an undergrad from CU, and I also work at the Planetarium, and sometimes I present shows when we are allowed to have people in the audience, and also I co-host the podcast.
You sure do.
Hi, John. John, you muted
John,
yourself.
You're muted.
You were unmuted. You were unmuted, and then you muted yourself to speak.
Yes. I'm the technical guy on this podcast. I'm John. I am the producer, the editor, the Zoom link maker. And yeah, I graduated from CU a couple years ago. Still working at Fiske, doing fun stuff like this podcast. So yeah, we're going to talk about, I guess, us.
We didn't get that far in our planning.
Yeah, this is kind of a new thing. Well, we typed out this document here, and there's just some questions that we can each answer. So here's a question for the room: how did we each get here?
Well, now, I woke up. I sat at my computer and I turned on Zoom.
I mean, literally, I'm in the same place that I woke up. So really, I've just kind of gone full circle today.
I woke up, got out of bed, made some coffee, and then came and sat at my desk. So my trip involved an extra step at the French press. But
yeah, I mean, yes, there was a trip to the microwave for me to get coffee. But
Tara, you know why I'm using a French press is because our normal coffee maker is broken. The French press is the backup. My parents gave it to us as when we moved in, and they were like, "Here, have this French press." And then our normal coffee maker exploded because I put too many grounds in it. And then now there's grounds and the water conduit, so it doesn't work anymore. So we're using the French press. Which is, it's great. I get lots more grounds in my coffee though, because I'm not really good at using it. So, oh well, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Hey. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers to that.
We all have our coffee.
To anyone who has not tried this, I cannot recommend enough using there's a splash of heavy whipping cream as your creamer for your coffee. It will make it taste like you're drinking clouds. It's so good. It's just like so fluffy and delicious.
That's what my mom does. My mom drinks heavy cream every day. So when I was at their house a couple weeks ago, I tried it, and I don't know, it's just too much for me. It's too sweet, like first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
I've been using almond milk though, and I like that.
One of my roommates who is, I don't know if he's lactose intolerant or just prefers to not drink milk, but he uses a coconut milk. It's like coconut milk half and half. It's like extra creamy coconut milk, and then
that sounds amazing.
Is it the coconut creamer from Trader Joe's?
No, it's Silk brand. We got it at Costco. No, yeah, something like that. So, but I imagine probably the same thing.
Yeah,
or similar. So.
This has nothing to do with the podcast. We went totally off.
So let's bring it back.
We can edit that part out.
No, I think these conversations are the point, right? It's a fun, just like a dialectical podcast that's not super focused. Tara, how did you get to be on the Fiske podcast? Starting from the moment you were born, what life events led to you being here with us in this Zoom meeting?
Well, when I was born in the early 80s, I always wanted to host a podcast. That's not true at all.
I like how you
was a young
say,
child.
I like how you say always, like from the moment you were born, like you were thinking, man, I've always wanted to do this. All a couple
Destiny.
minutes that I've been, an independent person that's alive.
I knew it as soon as I came out. No, I've always been a science person. I always liked nature and science. It was not always astronomy, although I loved sci-fi when I was a kid. I was a big nerd for Jules Verne. Like I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea probably 100 times by second grade. I wanted to be a marine biologist. Um, but I always liked sci-fi stuff and like watching Star Trek with my dad and things like that, Star Wars and all that. Um, and then I got into school and science was hard and math was really hard. And they were like, hey, you're a good writer. You should do that instead. I was like, okay. So I went to college and got an English degree and tried to be a writer for a while. I worked for a website doing movie reviews. I wrote some screenplays. Thought I wanted to be in the film business. Found out that I didn't want to be in the film business because it was terrible. And after a while of just working, I worked as a project manager for a long time and doing a whole bunch of random stuff. Decided that I'm sick of doing all this random stuff and I'm going to go back to school and be a scientist. So that's what I did. So yeah, I came back to CU in 2016, I think. Got an astronomy degree, started working at Fiske. That was my first like sciencey job. So it was super exciting. Yeah. And I worked at Fiske for a while doing outreach and presenting. And then we were having a meeting one day being like, what's going on with this, whole COVID shutdown? What are we going to do? And I remember Colin said, we should have a podcast. And I chatted Colin in the middle of the Zoom meeting, like, yes, let's have a podcast. And now we have a podcast. That's the short version, I guess.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to
that.
Who's next? Colin, would you like to share your story? Your origin story, perhaps?
Yeah. I was sent down in an alien spaceship one day in March of 2019. I applied to work at Fiske, and then the rest is exactly as you said. They asked what we should do with COVID, and I said, let's do a podcast. And then here we are. That's the whole story. No, believe it or not, I'm not an alien from space.
What?
I know. Don't believe that at all.
Few people
I'm so
do.
Disappointed.
I know. Few people can really wrap their minds around that. No, let's see. I came to CU to study astrophysics, and I remember when I was touring the college, I saw the planetarium, and I had not. Actually, that's a lie. I had been in a planetarium once before. It was the Gates Planetarium at Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I watched Black Holes, The Other Side of Infinity, with our good friend Qui-Gon Jinn. And it's Liam Neeson who narrates the show, and Qui-Gon from Star Wars. So that's the whole. Anyways, and I was I was pretty young at that point, and it wasn't a life-changing experience. It was super fun, but it wasn't one of those things where I was like, oh, I need to work at a planetarium. But I saw Fiske here at Boulder, and I went in and I was like, man, this is super cool. And we saw a show there. And afterwards, I went to the front desk and I spoke to Carla, who is our marketing person at CU or at Fiske, and I asked her if there would be any student employment. This was in the spring before I matriculated, and I was like, just this has happened, and she said, yeah, in fact, most of our staff is student staff. And so I made sure to kind of keep in touch with her and make sure I knew when the application was going to happen. And I actually was hired on my birthday, March 5th, the next year, which was super cool. That was a neat birthday present, and I was super stoked. And then, that's how I ended up at Fiske. And then, like Tara said, we were in that meeting, and I love podcasts. I listen to them all the time. And so I was like, man, how cool would it be to have one? And Fiske has some pretty cool stuff that we can do and access to lots of cool people. So that's that. And then now we have a podcast. Hooray. Popcorn John.
Yeah. So my story is somewhat similar to Tara's, actually. After high school, I had no real idea what I wanted to do. So I got a job just because I needed work and money at the local ski area, and was working as a lifty for a couple of years. Then decided that I wanted to get some higher education, so I went to the local community college and got my degree in ski area operations. But by the time I was about to graduate, I hated it. So I went ahead and graduated with the degree, but right after that, I uh, decided that I wanted to come here to CU because, like both of you, I've always loved space and always loved science. Um, my mom has a great story of when I was in first grade. I had a model Saturn V rocket that I decided to bring to school. And instead of recess, I gave a presentation on all the subsystems of the rocket. And
That's
so
adorable.
I know, right? It was like 45 minutes, and I was just going through every single stage and just every little bit of the rocket at what, 5 years old?
John, why are you not a presenter? Holy crap.
Right?
You can get paid to do that.
Get paid to do that. Yeah. So came to see you. Was thinking about doing aerospace engineering, but got into arts and sciences instead, and took my first astronomy class, and absolutely fell in love. So I declared as an astronomy major. Um, and then in the summer of between my freshman and sophomore year, I was looking for a job, and one of my friends was working at Fiske, and she said, "You should talk to Tito and see if you can get a job there." So I sent an email to Tito, and he called me. He said, "Come on in." My interview process was, "Well, what do you want to do?" And so I started working here as an usher. Fast forward a year later, they were looking to promote some new navigators from the usher staff. So started training as that. And yeah, it kind of just snowballed from there. Moving on to navigator and then to production work. And now I am a full dome production assistant, which means I do everything and anything related to making visuals and movies and things like that for the Full Dome and for Fisk's YouTube, including this podcast, which brings me to how I got involved in this. Colin emailed me one day saying, "Hey, you want to produce a podcast?" I emailed back, I think about as soon as I saw it. So it was almost immediate, like, yes, this needs to happen.
Hands down.
And so that's how it happened.
Well, I think
And
this
the
segues
rest is
perfectly into the next question that we kind of had for ourselves, which is how did the podcast come to be? Obviously, we've talked, a bit about how it came out of this, kind of vacuum of COVID and saying, how can we keep engagement? But, I guess the question is, so from that moment, from the time that all three of us were on board, like, yes, this is what's going to happen. We had, the funding approval to do it. What happened then? How did the podcast itself turn into a podcast?
It was funny because I had been thinking for like months before that I wanted to do more with like the faculty and staff who are doing research to talk to these people because we do like faculty presentations at Fiske.
But those are like once a month.
Yeah, but they're always like super popular
Yeah.
and well attended. Fran sells out 3 nights a week, every
Yeah.
time. So I was like, we should really talk. And, working over at LASP, I talk to people all the time who are doing really cool stuff. A lot of our grad students are doing really interesting research. So I was like, man, I wish we could like incorporate this somehow, especially when everything started to shut down, trying to think of things that we could do. like, I really wish we could do something that was like, just like interviewing people or having them come and maybe we could do faculty shows more often or whatever. So then when Colin brought up the podcast, it was like, that would be perfect for that sort of thing, which is why I
Well, I remember
jumped on it immediately.
Well, and I remember, when you private Zoom chatted me in that all staff meeting about like, hey, we should do this. We set up a Zoom meeting, I think for right after the staff meeting or very soon after at least, to talk about it. And I didn't really have any ideas. Like I was like, I don't, I know that we should have a podcast. That'd be sick, but I don't know what about. And right away, Tara was like, this would be super cool. And it was clear that like you had, this idea had been brewing for a long time. And that ended up being super nifty. To just jumpstart, hey, it was already like this developed idea that you had, and we were ready to go right from the start. So that was super cool.
Synergy.
Yeah. And then came the process of naming the podcast.
Oh boy, do we want to talk about that?
I think we have to.
I think we have to.
I don't know that that's something that we can exclude from this episode.
That's fair.
Perhaps you can splice in a shot of the list. The 3-page list.
I'm going to pull it up right now.
We had something like, 150 possible contenders.
Oh, God.
It was tough.
Probably 140 of which were just terrible.
Oh,
yeah. Well, and then, every once in a while, one of us would come up with a good name, and then we'd find out that it was already taken. And we were like, oh, crap, we can't use this. And so
eventually it boiled down to like, A View from Earth. Do you hate that? No, I don't hate that. I don't hate it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
All right, it's one that none of us hate. Let's go with that.
Yep.
No one is opposed to it. Cool.
I remember I put out on like Instagram or something a request for friends of mine to just send in their thoughts, because I was like, we have been talking about this literally for weeks and we cannot decide what to do. We have hundreds of names. And one of my friends, Jeff, sent in the name Observatories. And I think all of us at first were like, oh, that's a really clever little thing. The problem is we're not an observatory, we're a planetarium. So, and there is an observatory right behind us at Summers Bosch. And so we were like, I feel like that would, be kind of stealing some of their thunder. So, yeah, so that was a whole thing. That was, I think that was probably the toughest part logistically of starting the podcast, was deciding what to call it.
Yep. That was literally the last thing that we did was finally decide on a name.
Yeah. I think we spent 2 weeks and 2 meetings just on the name.
Yeah. So that was, and then the rest of it was pretty, I think we kind of decided on, hey, we're going to, have this interview format where, and that is great for Zoom because, it's just easy that way. And it's flexible. And luckily, Tara actually has done the bulk of scheduling people, which is because a lot, I would say probably 80% of our guests are fellow Laspians from
a lot of times.
Yeah. And so that was super cool that we just right off the bat had so many connections to people to, see who could be on the podcast. Yeah. And most people were really enthusiastic about it, I think.
Yeah, I don't think I had anyone that was like, no, I don't really want to be into that.
Right.
I think there was one person who couldn't make it, couldn't work it into their schedule, and that was fine. Mm-hmm. But he was still super excited about it. So,
right.
I mean, yeah, people love talking about the work that they do.
Yeah.
Super cool.
If you're doing this kind of work and you're spending, 80 plus hours a week doing it, you gotta love it.
Yeah, pretty much. That's something I've noticed is just like, I guess because it's, it's not an easy field to get into. To be an astronomer, an astrophysicist, you got to go through a ton of school, which is super expensive, and do all of this stuff. So you better love it when you get out.
Seriously.
It's like you worked really hard and spent a lot of money to get here. I think if you didn't love it, you wouldn't make it all the way through.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. I mean, we definitely talked to some guests who, loved what they did, but, every once in a while there was kind of this, feeling of like, hey, I'm here studying this thing and the rest of my community is kind of like, turning their heads a different way as far as like, what we want to, spend our time and resources on. And so it kind of highlighted the fact that even though it takes so much work and time and money and effort to get into, the position of being a professional astronomer or astrophysicist, even then you still kind of have to like fight for the stuff that you want to research and study, which, take from that what you will. But that was something interesting that I hadn't really thought about before talking to a lot of our guests.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the way that the system is set up. I mean, space is big. There's a whole lot of stuff that we don't know. And then, yeah, but you can't, I mean, I guess you could go and do all this work for free if you wanted to, but that isn't really realistic for a lot of people. You kind of want to get paid for the work that you do. And to get paid to be an astronomer means you have to fight for money. Like,
yep.
You don't just start working for a company and they, give you $40,000 a year or whatever. You have to write grants and solicit, and it's a mess. So I think it's just the whole mindset of fighting for funding for anything you want to do. Like if you're super interested in something really niche, it's harder to find the ability to do that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's just
Well, we talked with one person who actually is now my research advisor, Adam Kowalski, who studies stellar flares, which are like solar flares, but on stars that are not the sun. And, that is, I have come to learn, an incredibly small community. There are very few people who are studying stellar flares. And it just kind of surprised me because I was like, of all of the astronomers and astrophysicists that there are, and all of these things that you can study, it just feels like this should be so much bigger than it is, and every time I hear about a field that is, smaller than huge, I'm like, wait, really? That's crazy. So I don't know.
Yeah, there are so many just sub fields in astronomy that it seems like every week or so I hear about someone who's studying something I've never heard of. Like that.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, well, and I think that's part of, we talked about this, I can't remember with whom, but that's part of, what the process of science is you kind of start generally, as you explore your interests, and then the further you go, the narrower and narrower your, kind of research scope grows until you're studying this, like, what could be said to be this incredibly obscure, thing that no one has ever heard of before, like you said, John, and then the idea is, can I get someone to pay me to do this? And you have to make the argument for it. But anyways.
One piece of advice that I was given was like, when you're trying to think of what you want to study and what you want to research, to be broadly specific, which I thought was weird when I started thinking
about it. Oxymoron.
Yeah, but it really kind of works. Like the person who told me this was somebody who studies ice. So it's like, okay, so he does ice geology, but he can do that anywhere that there's ice. So like the moon or Europa or Mars, or it's very specific, but it's broadly applicable. Like craters are the same way. I'm a crater expert, which seems very niche. It's a super small community, but there's craters on like every body in the solar system. So really I can work on anything almost. So it's like, it's a very weird sort of balancey thing that you do. Like stellar flares, there's only like an uncountable number of stars out there that you could work on.
About that, yeah.
Specific but broad.
right, yeah, exactly. Well, and the cool thing about that, and this I think goes into the broadness of a specific field, is that you can, identify stellar flares from, instruments that are being used for other missions. They don't have to be designed for stellar flares. And I think that's a big part of what getting your research funded and kind of supported is saying, hey, can we double dip, right? If we're going to send up, some spacecraft, can I use the data that it gets that's not made for my research for my research? And if you can, then that's super bonus points, because now you don't have to go develop a new instrument or pour money into putting it on some spacecraft. So,
yep, totally.
Well, I think this is a good time to talk about how the podcast gets made. Now we've talked about how it came to be. How is it born? But now, we go to make an episode of the podcast. What goes into that? How does one do a podcast? And John, I think you're the perfect person to kind of start this one off.
Boy,
I'm just hearing the How It's Made theme in my head.
Yeah,
right
yeah,
now.
done. Yeah, exactly. Although there's probably some weird latency now because I was in sync with you on my screen, which probably means I was not in the full. Anyways, John, how is it made? Podcast edition.
So, not sure how much detail we actually want to go into on this.
I want you to share all of our SoundCloud and Google Drive passwords. That's how much detail we need to go into.
I'm not going to do that.
Sorry, Dave.
Sorry. No. Yeah. Yeah. So we start off by having a meeting where we talk about who we want to get on the podcast. And we come up with a list of names. We come up with more names than we actually need because many times people are not available or that sometimes they just don't respond to emails. So once we have that, Tara sends out emails, usually, sometimes Colin, but mostly Tara. Yeah. Sends out emails to prospective guests, and we try and schedule an interview. We've been using Zoom because that's what the university gives us. And so once we have our interview scheduled, we will meet with the guest on Zoom and record that Zoom meeting. Usually we're in there for probably an hour and a half. That includes any setup time that we have. After the interview is usually when we, at least for season 2, have been doing our intros and outros, and the short, like 5-minute conversation between Colin and Tara that I've been putting at the beginning of the episode. We'll do that after the episode, so that in case anything is talked about that is unclear, we can kind of give some definition before you hear the interview with the guest. And also generally just so we know what we talked about in the interview and we can hype it up a little bit for when we play the interview for you. Once that is all done and recorded, I will go into Adobe Premiere and import all the video and audio files and stitch it together. Season 2 has been really easy because we've been keeping the interviews to about an hour, and I just have to plop in the interview and we're all good. Season 1 was a little bit more tricky, trying to fit in 2 interviews per episode. We had to go through, each of us went through the interview and decided this is something I would really want to keep, or this is something that could just be in the extended interview. And then I would go through and cut up those episodes and splice them together and try and make an hour-long episode out of 2.5 hours usually of total interview. And then once that's done, I put the audio on SoundCloud and the video on YouTube, and it gets shunted to your podcast listening and viewing locations of preference.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I remember there was this consideration that we had. I haven't heard us talk about this more recently, about space, John, about how your hard drive was like filling up with just so many gigabytes of interview, material, like the raw recordings. What was going on there?
So for season 1, I was recording everything in 4K because I could, and I wanted the highest quality that I could get. Turns out you don't need it. But each interview, which was usually about an hour and a half long, was about 100 gigabytes. And so
each interview was 100 gigabytes?
Just about.
Oh my God.
And so over the course of all of season 1, we had about 20 guests.
Yeah, it was 10 episodes.
10 episodes.
So we had
Plus
2
news
terabytes.
and
plus news and yeah,
Wow.
plus
It is.
intros.
That is a lot.
Yep.
And so for season 2, you have not been doing this.
I have not been doing that.
Okay.
I've been doing it at a reasonable resolution.
Right.
And yeah, it's not even an issue anymore.
Do you still use your local screen capture or the Zoom recording that we take?
I've
the
been
video?
using the Zoom recording just because
Okay.
it's a one button thing and I don't have to worry about, Windows resizing or anything. It
Right.
automatically captures it.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember one time, for whatever reason, John, you couldn't be with us. And so we had to record. And I think we settled on recording to Tara's tablet, which was like, it was kind of like, is there space? Is this going to work the way that it normally does? And it went off without a hitch. But yeah, every once in a while we have one of those technical things where we're like, let's just hope and make sure that, we're trying to do our best.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's how it's made, podcast edition. So
yeah.
In case you ever want to make a podcast, that's how you do it. Get some guests. Oh, we also write some questions before the interview, right?
Yes.
Do some research on the guest so that we have something to talk about to guide our conversation. And that's something that we, in the second season, the first season, part of what made those interviews, I think, somewhat more difficult to, well, it was kind of a whole thing. We really changed kind of the way that we were doing it. It went from having, kind of going from question to question in season 1 over the summer to being more of a conversation, right? Where we, the goal was to have like, a small handful of questions and then that would just guide conversation. But really the idea was to really just talk, right? And if we stopped talking at some point, we could have a question ready to kind of keep going.
Yeah.
And I think that format worked a lot better. It felt more natural. And so, but yeah, and then, interview material goes to podcast and that's that. So I think John has put in, especially season 1, was putting in like something like 4 times the amount of work in terms of time that Tara and I had because of how long it takes to cut those together. So thank you so much, John, for doing that.
Yay.
Cool. Well, okay. So here I am using this format that we just talked about of our guiding questions. So our next guiding question, I feel like we're in like a class discussion right now. Our next guiding question is what hopes do we have for the future of the podcast? Where is the podcast going? Or for yourself, we can talk about that too. We've got time, so
I'm just happy we get to keep doing it.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what the future looks like. I guess we've started work on season 3. We have our list of people that we're trying to get a hold of and some topics that we want to talk about.
Yeah,
that.
I'm
Shrug.
really liking the format that we have right now. I think it's really easy to listen to. We get some great guests and some good information. And I feel like, and I hope you listener also agree that it's entertaining.
That is the goal.
I think we're hilarious.
I think we're hilarious.
There's a lot of yikes. Yeah.
I would like to see our listenership grow. I think that is our next challenge that we're going to be tackling, is growing our listener base. I think we're thinking about starting our own social media channels. So instead of using Fiske's channels, we'll have our own Instagram, Twitter, things like that, where we'll post updates about the show, probably on a little bit more regular basis than we are doing right now. So I think that will help.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I agree.
Tease any guests?
I don't know.
Ooh.
Do we have anyone confirmed yet?
I don't know that we do. Minus like the 3 that were carried over from last season that were like, hey, let's do it next season.
Yes, but potentially we'll be talking. I suppose we could talk about some topics that we have coming
There we
up.
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Actually, I'll have to pull up the list. Where's our list?
Yeah, I agree, John. I think that my really one big hope for the future is that we can grow the viewership. I think that's kind of the next step to take.
Yeah, I think we've been having a little bit of trouble kind of getting the word out.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing it mostly on our own social medias,
Mm-hmm.
and I think Tara's been the one who's been doing the most.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, advertising is expensive.
It is. It's hard.
Yeah.
To get in touch with people that you aren't already talking to personally, that's about a product.
Oh yeah. Oh, one surprising way we're getting our episodes out is the campus radio station
Yeah.
is playing our episodes as kind of like a syndication, where they'll play an episode in not any particular order, but we get our episodes on the radio. Yay!
Woo! That's pretty cool.
Exciting.
Yeah.
And it's the same radio source that NPR uses, right? Like it's like a real live radio station,
Yeah.
you know?
Do you have that list up, Tara?
I'm trying to find it.
Where did we put it?
Boy.
Here we go. Okay.
Oh, great. Perfect.
So we are looking at things like talking a bit more about black holes. I know everybody always loves black holes. So we have some black hole physics coming up. Someone to talk about satellites and spacecraft and fabrication and engineering of satellites and spacecraft. A guy from LASP is excited to talk with us about that. We're looking at things like space policy and mission design, a little outside of the pure science and into some of the more, I don't know, what would you call those? Political side of space exploration.
Like what it takes for humanity to get to space.
Right.
The people story.
Beyond the technology. Yeah.
We're looking at some climate change and climate monitoring. Rocket science and how you build rockets, maybe talking a bit about astrophotography. We even have a gentleman who might come talk to us about science philosophy, which I think is super fun. I took a whole class about it and it was fascinating. So those are kind of the things that we're kind of looking at coming up. A couple of cool topics. Of course, we will always take suggestions for topics and guests. If you want to send an email to A View from Earth at or what's our, I don't even remember.
Fiske podcast at colorado.edu.
Normally I have this written down right in front of me.
Well, you know why it's called Fiske podcast? It's because we made the email before we decided on our freaking name.
Yes, we did.
And so we were just had to be generic about it. So
yes.
I have a question for John and Tara. After we have done interviews and more interviews and more interviews, you know, we will have had conversations about every little nook and cranny of, you know, space exploration and space science. And obviously we can repeat some of those, you know, topics of conversation like black holes, right? We've done that a couple of times. And that's great because it's super interesting stuff. But I wonder if either of you sees the podcast going in a direction that includes episodes, you know, besides this one that aren't just interviews, like, or, you know, some other, you know, a way to kind of expand what sort of content we produce, right? After we've had all of these conversations and all of these different topics with all of these different people, you know, what comes after that? Assuming just pretend we had unlimited money, which is a great thing to think about, a fun game to play.
That's a good question.
Yeah. One of the cool things about this kind of science, though, is that it's always changing, I think. So for us to go back and maybe repeat topics it could be done in a way that doesn't feel repetitive because, you know, there's always new discoveries and people who are finding out new and exciting things. We're going to this planet now. We found this other planet, you know, this and that. So I don't want to say it's like an endless kind of thing, but I think it does kind of lend itself to just maybe just the format is, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I think it's it wouldn't hurt us to stick with the interview sort of thing just because of the way that the field is.
Yeah, I think that is kind of the pull of the podcast is the guests, and it's fun to have uh, occasional episodes like this one where we are the guests, or we were floating the idea of one episode we go and say tour Lockheed Martin down in Arvada or Aurora, one of the A towns in Colorado near Denver.
Over there
um,
somewhere.
and that would be an episode. And for the audio listeners, we would describe what we were doing, and for the video watchers, we would film it and just have a tour of like Lockheed Martin. That would be an episode. But I think, yeah, like you were saying, Tara, there's, if not an endless supply of people to interview, pretty darn close. Especially if we decide to not specifically stick to space science. If we wanted to go climate science, or this season we had an atomic physicist on talking about time, which was an amazing episode.
Time science.
It was
Time
super
science.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, the whole thing, we've always tried to focus from the beginning. One of the big things was to really like humanize the science. It's not, we're not just here to talk about science. You can get
Right.
that anywhere.
Right.
But we really want to bring out the people that are doing the science, because
Yeah.
they are just as interesting, if not more so.
If not more interesting.
Right. Right.
Sometimes
You know,
they are even more interesting.
In the best way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, I think the interview format really lends itself to that too. And I would not be opposed to, you know, we normally at the end of every interview have a little segment where we're like, so how did you get here? And, you know, let's hear about your story. I would like to maybe go back a couple of times and maybe talk to some people that we've talked to before, but get even more into like their backstory and get some more personal information. Cause you know, just from the little snippets that we get, just 2 or 3 minutes, so many of them are just fascinating.
Oh yeah.
It's been
And
all
you know,
over the world.
and people that have been in the field for like 50 years.
Yeah.
Like Dr. Bagenal, Dr. Esposito, these people who have worked on these legendary missions and, you know, hung out with Carl Sagan. I took a class from a guy who was friends with Stephen Hawking. You know, it's just like, these are fascinating people.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've been so happy about my education at CU, is that you are 2 breaths away from some of these world-class scientists and world famous names. You'll be taking a class from someone who took a class from Carl Sagan, or who works with you know, the mission director of Hubble. Yeah.
Has a
I remember-
constant named after them.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, I took a class from a Nobel laureate one time. It's like, this is, yeah, mind-blowing stuff. So plug CU.
Yeah.
Yeah,
place to
right.
come.
Scope Offs.
Yeah. It really is, though. Like, it's a great
is.
place to get an education. I laugh every time I walk past the engineering building and there's like a little, you know, they put little flags on the poles. It's like, CU was the first to do this and the number one in this. And my favorite one is the only university to send a spacecraft to every planet in the solar system.
Yes.
And Pluto.
Yeah. Go us. And Pluto.
Yeah.
Hey,
Pluto's a planet.
Yeah.
Dwarf planets are still planets.
Yeah, we don't have to add Pluto to that list. It's already there, John. I've always thought the very fascinating one that actually for a while hung right outside Fiske is that CU has sent more astronauts to space than any other institution, which is pretty cool. It's like 18 astronauts now from CU.
Oh, it's in the 20s.
Oh, is it? Great. There you go. Yeah. It's a lot. So
it's insane just to have access to that. Like,
we're pretty cool like that.
In the place that you go to work every day.
Yeah. I think we're getting close to an hour here. And I know this time that is on my screen, an hour, 1 minute and 39 seconds, is includes the time that we spent not actually doing the episode in the front. So we have a few more minutes. But the last thing that we kind of, asked ourselves to talk about is, what are we all doing outside the podcast? Who is Tara, if not a podcast, a View from Earth co-host or presenter or outreach?
we don't exist until we turn on the Zoom.
That's right. Yeah. Remember that part about how I was an alien that came down and there's no backstory? That's it. That's the whole thing. So either of you, what do you do outside of making podcasts about space?
Well, I'll start because I think I'm the least interesting, and you can judge.
Well, you can't say that, John.
False.
Outside the podcast,
have to have known you were going to get attacked once you said that. Come on.
It was a little bit of a fishing situation, so yeah, I'll take it. Outside the podcast, I enjoy all the stereotypical Colorado activities: going fishing, camping, skiing, but do them about as much as most Coloradans actually do them, which is essentially not at all. But I've been enjoying reading. I just got President Obama's memoirs that he just wrote, and I've been reading that, and it's fascinating. And because I'm a nerd like this, I enjoy doing the same thing I do for work for fun, where I've been going back to all the Marvel movies and editing them down into trailers.
Yeah. I love it.
That's pretty sick. I did not know that you did that. That's super cool.
I've only recently started, but I've been having a lot of fun doing it.
And that's the ultimate goal, is to be in a job that you enjoy so much that you do it when you're not working,
Absolutely.
If your job is that enjoyable, like that's what I'm aiming for, at least.
Yeah. I was doing it last night, and I started at about 8, and the next time I looked at the clock, it was 2 a.m.
That's pretty sick.
That's how you work.
Man. Yeah. Nice. John, your picture on the biography for our podcast webpage has you in an airplane in a cockpit. What's going on with that?
In a cockpit, and I was flying the plane. So I just the same way I've always loved space. I can't say I've always loved aviation, but I really enjoy it. And so I've been taking some flying lessons, not so much recently, obviously, because, tight spaces and all. Those little
just
Cessnas,
roll down the window.
Yeah,
you get some airflow in there.
Those little Cessnas are very small, and I am a big person. But yeah, I've been enjoying that. And that is like the second option for a career if I don't end up in video production, is possibly something in aviation.
If you went that direction, would you want to do something like private aviation, or would you want to end up in like a commercial airline and fly for them in your ideal aviation scenario?
Ideally, probably commercial.
Nice.
Yeah. Either passenger or cargo, or cargo.
Right.
Yeah.
That'd be cool if I could get on a plane and be like, "Oh, hey, Captain Schiller, thank you for flying us."
Yeah.
And you'd be like, "You bet, Colin."
But that is a lot of money on top to get trained in that, on top of the degree I already have. So yeah, it would be the third career switch that I've made.
Never too late.
It's never too late. Yeah. I'm also one of those people who does something for a couple months or a couple years, and I was like, okay, I've done that. Now I'm going to go do something else.
Novelty. I'm there with you, John. Yep. Yeah. It's always fun to explore new things to kind of get into.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a career field where that's your job, is you just get paid to try new things all the time and then get good at them, and then you move on. I don't know how that would work, but that'd be pretty cool.
I don't know how that would work either.
Yeah.
Oh, well. To find that though.
Yeah, right. Tara, how
How do
about
I
you?
do that?
Yeah, right.
What do I do outside of the podcast? At the at the moment, not a whole
Podcast is life.
yeah, since the whole shutdown, it's been slim pickings. It was crazy. Before that, I was like working 3 jobs and going to school full time, and then everything shut down in March. And I was like, well, I finished my degree, and then I was like, the planetarium's closed. LASP was closed, and I just was finishing up a research project, so I didn't have anything to do. It was like the worst 3 weeks of my life because I had nothing.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, but since then, we've been doing more stuff at Fiske with our online programs. We're doing the weekly Dome to Home series, which I've been presenting most of those, which has been super fun. We're talking all about perseverance going to Mars. And so we did a whole thing about that. And so I've been hosting those, which is really fun. It's kind of like being in the planetarium again, because we still have the virtual dome that the navigator flies around, and it's not quite the same, but it's still really fun. And so we've been kind of doing that and expanding some of our outreach options. So I'm still getting to present shows, which is nice. I did end up getting another research project to work on after I finished the last one. So that was really exciting. So I've been doing that for a couple months now, looking at ices on the south pole of the moon, in craters, of course.
And what is this project for?
This is for the Lunar Flashlight mission that's part of the Artemis program. So I think it's supposed to go up next year. I think it's on Artemis 2, 1 or 2. I hope Paul's not listening and think I don't know what I'm doing. Sorry, boss. Yeah, so it's an instrument that's going to the south pole of the moon, and it's going to basically like shoot lasers at the ground and try to figure out where the ice deposits are. So I'm kind of doing some pre-flight modeling of, hey, this other instrument gave us all of these temperature maps. Here's where we think that the ice should be. Here's what the readings we should get back from the instrument should look like when we actually do get them. So it's kind of kind of pre-flight modeling, and then developing sort of a data processing pipeline so that when we do start getting fresh data, we don't have to start developing the pipeline then. We already have something that we can just throw it into and be like, okay, this matches what we expect. Which is fun. I'm learning a lot about like instrument calibration and development and stuff like that, which is not something I've ever done. So that's
Right.
exciting.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that in like a couple years, we have to have you, Tara, on the podcast as the interviewed scientist.
Oh yeah.
To talk about this work that you just described after it's been
Perhaps.
said and done. That'll be pretty
Yeah.
good.
That would be fun. Yeah, it's still kind of new, and I'm still working out a lot of this new stuff. But it's fun to be on a new project on a new planet, moon. So I've been working on that, and then just last week I signed on to. I'm helping a local startup company. I'm kind of like running it's kind of like a Twitch channel. It's not exactly a Twitch channel, but I'm doing like a weekly space show for preschoolers.
That's
Like
cool.
3 to 6. So that's going to be a thing. I did an outreach for them a couple of months ago, and it was really fun. So I'm getting ready to start doing that too. So a lot of teaching, a lot of outreach work, which is super fun. That's what I love doing it.
Yeah. Is that something you'd want to do perhaps as a career down the line, is teaching?
That's my end goal. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm trying to get into a place where I could teach at a research university, because that's kind of the best of both worlds. I can still do really awesome, NASA science, and then also teach at the same time, because I like teaching at the university level. Not so much, I'm not like a middle school, high school. I can do it and I love it, don't get me wrong, but I really want to be able to, work at that higher level and be able to teach and do my research at the same time.
Yeah.
Which I think is my jam.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, I do love doing outreach and teaching, and I'll do that anywhere, anybody that wants me.
So if you want Tara to come and work at your research institution,
If this PhD thing doesn't work out,
Fiske
I'm chattering.
podcast at colorado.edu.
That's right. That's right.
Thanks, John. You'd be my pitch man.
Yes. And
How about
Colin.
Colin?
Podcast is life. That's it.
That's it.
There's
That's all
nothing.
there is.
Cheers to that. Well, I'm just going into my, what would this be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth semester of my undergrad. And so most of my time, especially this semester, there's pretty much no time that I am not doing physics or should be doing physics. So that's been my life for the past 13 weeks, is just doing lots and lots and lots of physics between my 3 physics courses. And that's expected to get even more physicsy next semester. So that's super cool. And that's kind of what I do outside of, podcasting these days. But I also, the other science part of myself is that I am a musician. I play the piano, and I am a music director for a local educational theater company. So over the summers, we do these little 2-week summer camps that are like, just really quick, put up a show, summer stock style musicals. And I really love doing that. And so that's my kind of other half, is that I do music. And like John, I love doing all of the things that Coloradans love to do, and I do them about as often as Coloradans do, which is very rarely. I do like rock climbing. That's something that is kind of a little bit less, popular among people, is to go rock climbing. In fact, just yesterday, I was out bouldering with my roommate on Flagstaff. There's lots of really cool boulders up there. And we approached this boulder, and there was this guy, and it's pretty big. Like, there's definitely space for 2 parties there, right? And there was this guy at this boulder, and he got really upset that we were there, and he was yelling at us, and expressing his just pure anger that we were had the audacity to come climb at a rock that he was also at. And he was throwing his stuff around, and then he left, and we were like, that was a very interesting experience. And so that was kind of a little scary and kind of cool in retrospect, to be like, wow, that happened. Neat. So anyways, but yeah, that's a lot of fun, which is interesting because I'm not a very physically risk-taking person. I don't do a lot of stuff that, I could potentially get injured or killed doing, which is ironic because of, rock climbing is the top of that list. So I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, is mostly being a student. So, not quite as interesting as, doing science or flying airplanes but it's fine. That's
You said
it's very,
you said Adam Kowalski was your mentor in talking about solar physics. Is that something you want to
yeah.
do?
Yeah, well, that's the question, right? That's kind of what that's the reason that I am engaging in this undergraduate research, and so far it's been a lot of fun. I love talking with the other people in our group and working with them. It's actually been kind of a slow start because for a long time the idea was that I was going to work on this one star that had this huge flare that was supposed to, it was very interesting and kind of an anomaly to the community. And then it turns out that the data that we have on that flare is not reliable. And we didn't know that to begin with, but I was asking someone, outside of our group a question about it, and they were like, oh, you shouldn't use this data because it's not good. And so we looked at it and we were like, wow, it really isn't. So that kind of went down the drain.
Yeah.
Welcome to science.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So that changed it a little bit. But it's a lot of fun. What I've realized actually that I really enjoy is the computer science aspect of all of the research. And that what's interesting is that it doesn't have to be related to the research, right? I've done CS projects in all sorts of things that are not astronomy or physics, and regardless, it's just always a lot of fun. So I'm actually starting to explore the possibility of going into a computer science related field later in life, because I've found that that's actually just a ton of fun for me. So That's kind of a cool thing that has come out of doing this research, and we use it as a tool in a lot of our like astronomy and physics courses. So that's a lot of fun. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. So
That's fun.
yeah.
Y'all make me feel bad. I sound like I don't have any hobbies. I just
You're
talk
a
about
very
work all
busy
the time.
person.
I know. I used to do cool stuff.
Cool. Well, I guess that wraps things up for us today. So for anyone that tuned in, thanks so much for joining us. And we hope you all have a happy holiday, and keep your eye out for season 3 coming later in the spring. And also keep an eye on the website. Make sure you are on board with any updates. As always, we always appreciate any financial assistance. If you feel compelled to make donations to A View from Earth, it really helps us out a lot. And send us your questions. We've got a whole new season, a whole new fleet of guests to ask them to. So that's all I have to say about that. And take care. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Happy holidays.